Back for yet another CABAL. I'm just checking to make sure everything's running smoothly on Twitter. And if you're in, let me know. If you're in the chat, let me know. Drop a line. Let's see here. If you're in, drop a line, drop some comments in the chat. How are we doing? How are we doing? You guys are gonna love this, but I'm actually I'm off wine for a few months. I'm taking a big detox and breather. I'm gonna resume at Thanksgiving and see how I feel about it. But it's gonna be it's well needed break. Well needed break. Um, and I've turned a table, turned a corner with it in my life, and it just wasn't resonating as much as it was anymore. I still enjoy it. Don't get me wrong, but whenever you always have to look at this stuff and you have to think, do you get to certain levels, and you have to be willing to examine yourself objectively and to basically let go of certain patterns. I mean, if that is if there's one thing that we can like talk about right now, what's going on in the world for us on a spiritual level, we have to be willing to change. We have to be willing to let things go. And so my intention is to take this, 5-month hiatus, and I'm about a week into it already. To take this 5-month hiatus and come back in Thanksgiving, and then be able to really take a very moderate, sparing approach with it. What in my mind sounds good would be like to open a bottle on Friday night, a nice bottle, and to enjoy it over the weekend, and then to go back. That to me would be the good move, the good move. So we'll see, how it plays out, but that's a big personal update for me to take that choice. But yeah, I just want to take care of my health and always make sure I'm challenging myself and getting to the next level with things. So it's good to see you guys. Property Prince here. Property Prince coming back from the club at 3 a.m. I love it. I absolutely love it. This is exactly what he wanted when he had come back. He got himself some some late night snacks, like little snackies, late night snackies. All right, guys. I think we're about ready to jump right in. What do you guys say? Let's do this. So, in the interest of keeping this stuff kind of, concise, I'm not going to go too much into things. The usual Ukrainian shenanigans are going on. Russia's stomping them in the Donbass. Ukrainians losing battalion of men a day. Brutal, brutal shit. And now we have the Kaliningrad gambit, where they have Lithuania trying to threaten Kaliningrad, trying to cut off access, which is in violation. It's by international law, it's arguably a declaration of war. And now you have similar treaty violations with Norway in Svalbard. It's amazing. It's amazing what they're doing. It's amazing, the whole thing. But, we talked about Kaliningrad a few months ago. I was always like, and look, it doesn't take a genius to sort of see the strategic value. Kaliningrad's an obvious target. Like, let's not delude ourselves that, well, they were going to go after. Well, of course they were. That makes the most sense. Nevertheless, it's actually happening. And theoretically, they're trying to de-escalate it. But let's be honest here. We know Lithuania didn't cut off rail access from Russia to Kaliningrad, which is also Russia. So, by the way, to understand this in the treaty, this is why it's a big deal. Lithuania's not, cutting off access because of trade stuff, right, in the sanctions package, ostensibly. But the issue here is that this is not trade between Lithuania and Kaliningrad. This is trade between Russia and Kaliningrad, which is between Russia and Russia. So it's internal trade. So it's a violation of trade within Russia. And Lithuania became independent and when they were allowed to join NATO, there were treaties that were signed. And that, so that's the whole thing. It is a very, very serious issue. And the Russians are getting more and more confident by the day because they're, another point of this stuff that I just want to make is that on the military side of things in the macro, Russia hasn't revealed much of its most technological weapons. And this is just so important because if you were to get into a hot war with NATO, right now Russia has basically but it has most of NATO weaponry because of it got sent to Ukraine. A lot of these things like the howitzers, the advanced howitzers, which by the way aren't working very well, the Russians captured them almost immediately. And that's important because they can reverse engineer them to understand how they work and to understand how to create countermeasures specifically for Western weapons. So one of the things, just to give like a kind of tactical strategic assessment here, the Russians haven't been doing deep airstrikes into Ukraine because you have NATO radar command ships all throughout the borders, and they have the range that they are relaying targeting information to Ukraine the entire time. And so Russia doesn't venture beyond tactical air sorties in Ukraine because it actually puts their planes at risk. And if Russia were to attempt to jam Ukrainian or NATO radar, if Russia would attempt to do countermeasures to this, then NATO would understand, they'd get data and they'd be able to develop countermeasures against Russia in electronic warfare. So Russia's been like ridiculously cautious to not show NATO, not tip their hand to NATO about what they actually possess. It's just like, God, don't you just wish you had people who thought like that running our countries? Don't you just wish you had people at that level of intelligence? And that's the whole thing. Like, from what Property Prince is saying right here, with this former Dutch ambassador told a bunch of normies that U.S. caused this. The U.S. 100% caused this. 100% caused it. Or we can at least say Davos and the World Economic Forum caused this together with the U.S. And this is a good segue into. Yeah. By the way, Jose, I'm dry for the next 5 months, so it'll be a long time. I'm taking a break off the booze and letting the body recover, and I'll see how I feel afterwards. Like I said, I expect what I'd like to do is just get to a bottle a week kind of thing. One nice bottle a week. That would be a nice little rolling average. Skip some weeks, maybe special occasion a little bit more. Anyway, but this is all a big segue into the box, right? Box probably a good option, actually. This is a good segue though into what is actually going on in the strategic situation in the West, and this dovetails. So if you think back to two COVID cabals ago, and I talked about all of the I talked about that the Fed and Wall Street were against Davos, and that's what Tom Luongo's theory was, and he was kind of going into this. And there's another piece of that puzzle was revealed to me recently. listening to a conversation with Robert Barnes, that Duran had with Robert Barnes, and he was talking about the three aspects of the deep state in the United States. And I've never heard someone break it down so perfectly, but it's really well done, like really brilliantly done. And that's, you have the neoliberals, and to an extent as well with them, he didn't say this, but neoliberals and neoconservatives, basically, that essentially control the, how do I put it? They control the intelligence agencies, the CIA, FBI, and the State Department, basically. And these are the Davos people, the diplomats, the talkers, the individuals who are really rabidly anti-Russian. And the difference between the neoliberals and the neoconservatives is simply style at the end of the day. I mean, they're both, neocons are Trotskyites, so they're all communists in their own way. They all desire some global order. And I don't think it's really material to necessarily waste our time going into the differences between the neocons and the neoliberals, because they're so, neoliberals are usually a little bit more PR focused, airstrike focused, whereas the neocons prefer a nice big war. And the neocons are a bridge between the intelligence agencies and the State Department and the Defense Department. So the Defense Department, that part of the deep state, is the military-industrial complex. And so the military-industrial complex, and these are the guys who, that Eisenhower warned us about, who want the U.S. involved in all sorts of little things, but not in a way that's necessarily threatening. They just want to get like the bucks up, right? The grift up. That's what the military-industrial complex wants. And then you have the Treasury, which is like the Treasury and the Fed and Wall Street. And they are, of the three, the most responsible, because they want to make money. And they definitely want to protect the value of the dollar. So you have these three primary factions: one that controls intelligence agencies, press outlets, and diplomatic figures, right? So that's the neoliberals, neocons, because they are also obviously heavily represented in media. They're the PR people, right? The PR people. The spin. Look at put the spin on things, right? And then you have the military-industrial complex that really just wants the grift off of producing more weapons of dubious relevance. And then you have Treasury, which wants to maintain economic advantage. Probably the most prudent of the three branches. And so what we have here is a big old fight between these three factions, because the neolibs and the neocons, they want war with Russia at all costs, because their war is a PR war, and they don't want to lose the PR war. They got to win the PR war. And I'm wondering, I'm just going to make it a side thing. I haven't really listened into it yet, but the Ukrainians kept making assaults on Snake Island. Remember the Snake Island defenders, all that bullshit. They kept making all these attacks on Snake Island, which are getting like wiped out. And they made an attack just a few days ago. They got wiped out. But then yesterday or today, the Russians abruptly pulled out of Snake Island. Now, I wonder if this is just some sort of strategic trap, because I don't know. I haven't heard the reasons why. I think ostensibly it's about grain shipments, allow that to go through, but I haven't heard the reason why. But it would seem to me, if the Russians were going to give the Ukrainians exactly what they wanted, it was because they want them almost to stay like cocky. I think that the Russians have realized correctly that Western PR obsession is their own undoing, because it causes them to make really dumb strategic decisions. So, I mean, attacking Snake Island over and over again, losing all these people for really, frankly, strategically irrelevant, at least in this war. I don't want to say completely strategically irrelevant, but I mean, given Ukraine's position right now, it's not really the thing to care about. Maybe it's more relevant to Russia, you'd think. So Russia giving that up to Ukraine, there would have had to have been a reason to do it. And the art of war is all about appearing weak when you're strong, and getting your enemy to commit to big errors. And so I think, giving the Ukrainians their little PR win, yeah, we took Snake Island, letting them get themselves all amped up again with their delusions of grandeur, it works in Russia's favor because there is a lot of shifting sands within Ukraine itself, because you have the Zelensky people who take all of their orders from the PR people in the West, right, the neolibs. And you also have the Ukrainian military, which is basically like, this is bullshit. Why are we sending men into a cauldron and having them get slaughtered? Why are we doing these pointless attacks? We should be doing maneuver warfare and trying to hold less of a static line, but allowing the Russians to push in and then pull back and then flank them, etc., using the space of Ukraine to their advantage and natural barriers like the Dnieper River. So, very interesting that they did this. I'll have to look into it more. But the point is, so you have this neoliberal neocon group, and they want desperately. There's no option of retreat for them. Because they have to win their info war, and so they're going to keep. They don't have a plan. Their plan was to have Russia collapse economically, and this is where the World Economic Forum, everything started to really unravel for them, because when Russia did not collapse economically, because they spent the last 8 years preparing for this. And by the way, I want to remind you guys of something. So, Donbass separatist uprising breaks out in 2014 after the stolen, let's just say, overthrow of the government in Ukraine, the Maidan. Russia, and it's important to understand this, Russia was not actively supporting these separatist movements in the beginning. They were sort of forced into it from the separatist movements. If you don't believe that, I mean, none of you guys would not believe that. But I recommend reading 85 Days in Slavyansk, great book. Talks about the initial siege of Slavyansk, which was kind of like the real beginning of the uprising, the military uprising there, and really just how it was totally voluntary, and that they kept expecting in the beginning that Russia was going to come in, and Ukraine was expecting that Russia was going to come in, and then Russia didn't. Russia was hemming and hawing, as they like to say. And the reason for that was because Russia was not economically prepared for a war with the West. And Russia would have been wiped out. If they had done sanctions like this in 2014, they would have broken Russia. And they might have actually achieved their regime change. And so Russia was frantic at that point. They realized that, we have been too naive in dealing with the West. And we need to buy time and get our shit together to prepare for the inevitable conflict that's going to result. But Putin wouldn't have had time to do that. The war in the Donbass was hot all the way up until 2016, all the way through 2016, and then Trump gets elected. And so they were intending to amplify and push that war then. They were intending for this war with Russia to occur during Hillary Clinton's presidency, where there was going to be a nuclear exchange. Small scale. That was their plan. And Hillary not getting elected changed everything, because Trump, he wasn't going to give Russia the ability to move forward, but he bought them time because he wasn't going to move against Russia. It's a very, very important point here. That time that Trump gave Putin is the reason that Russia is able to succeed now, because they had 8 years instead of like 2 to 4 to prepare economically for this whole thing. And a lot of the separatists in the Donbass, there was resentment about this, but Russia made the right strategic decision. I mean, I think it's unquestionable. You can win the military war in Ukraine really quickly, but then crumble under international sanctions. You didn't win. You won tactically, you didn't win strategically. And so Putin bought time in the Donbass and then got Russia ready to deal with the problem and is going to deal with it once and for all now. Okay, so back to these groups. The PR group, they want war and they are going to provoke it on every single way possible. They don't have a plan at this point. When the economic plan failed and they couldn't, meme into existence a Russian loss, they're panicking. They're freaked out. And so what they're hoping is that by creating some kind of conflict, they're going to put Russia in a situation where it can't win. But the reality is that, Russia's going to get overextended. Russia can't deal with the front. Well, actually, it's NATO that can't deal with the front. And so these are more problems for Russia, but they're problems Russia's capable of dealing with, but NATO isn't. So it's kind of like a hope and pray scenario for these guys. And the other factions of the deep state don't like this. They're not a fan of this. The military isn't a fan of it because the military just wants their grift. And they also don't like the fact that the Ukrainians are constantly talking about how bad Western weapons are. The howitzer fires like 3 rounds and then stops working. The javelins don't work half the time. I mean, this is like brutal PR. It's like, the mystique of Western weaponry. Nobody can beat it. Well, let's be fair. The United States hasn't fought a war against a major power since Korea. And in Korea, you could argue it was kind of a stalemate. People say we lost Korea. I think that's maybe unfair. But we certainly had a stalemate in Korea. So the military-industrial complex has not been tested. I mean, it lost in Vietnam. It lost in Iraq. It lost in Afghanistan. And now it's losing in Ukraine. So it's actually got a pretty bad track record at this point. And they're starting to, they want to make some more money. They want enough tension that everybody, gets more contracts and blows a bunch of taxpayer money. But they don't really want a war because they're not prepped for it. So they're very uncomfortable with it because that's a great way to really lose your racket, is to lose a big fucking war and to get humiliated and have all these contracts have to be canceled because the stuff you're making, just like American torpedoes in World War II, don't work. Putin is a great chess player, and Jeff, it's a really, really good comment. When they shut down their nuclear reactors for Russian gas, that was checkmate. That was checkmate. And it's just amazing. Yeah, it's really amazing. It's really amazing. I mean, you don't have to like the guy, but you got to admire the strategy. I mean, we haven't seen strategy in the likes of this in ages. And I can already see how this is going, that by the end, I mean, Ukraine is going to be so broken, and it's going to be, my current prediction here, and I've kind of said it, but I'll be more clear because they're going to annex all of Novorossiya, and Ukraine will, except for Transcarpathia, will be a puppet state that will be depleted of population and denazified and brought back into the fold. And I actually don't think it's going to be very difficult because Ukrainians are already waking up to the haze of the fact that this government that they have, they're being used by the West, and that they're the ones who are suffering. In the end, there's going to be plenty of information. The combination of information that Russia will have broadcast to the Ukrainian public about what occurred, the trials that are going to occur, and all the Russian money that will be spent reconstructing Ukraine, it's just not going to be a problem. I think the Ukrainians are going to remember their, like a family dispute. They're not going to have the same kind of, deep grudges that people would really think, like, the Russians and the Germans have, the Germans and the French have. I don't think it's the same kind of thing because so much of this Bandera Ukrainian nationalism is kind of fake and made up. I mean, it's propaganda, right? So it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But you can see how this union state develops. And so it's the annexation of Novorossiya. And then after that, there's going to be, I mean, I do think in the end, we see Russia take the Baltics. That's this whole threatening stuff in Kaliningrad. I just think it's going to happen. And NATO's not going to defend the Baltics, and that's going to be the end of NATO. And I think that's how it plays out. And hopefully it won't be too much more expansive than that. Who knows? But the military industrial complex is not happy about the way this is taking, and the Treasury is really not happy about the way this is taking. Now, I know you have stuff from Yellen, the stupid little, this is like the compromise position where they're going to try to do price controls on oil internationally. Can you imagine this insanity that they're going to do price controls on international markets on Russian oil? So basically it's like, okay, you can actually ship Russian oil, but you can only ship it at a certain price, but you can't ship this other oil. I mean, it's not going to change a single thing. It's just going to make the price of oil across the board go up, because you can't do that. And also you can't even force compliance for all the countries to do it. So it's just more shortages. And what they're trying to do in the West to deal with the shortages, they can't, because their policy leads to them not having the resources that they want. And because, of course, they want to get rid of people, their economic policy is demand destruction, which means actually the destruction of people, both physically in terms of making them sick and killing them off, and making them economically unable to purchase things anymore. So they want to lower your cost of living, and they want to kill you to reduce global demand to fix the economy. That's it. That's brilliant. They're Keynesian, so they understand that you either need to, if you have an issue in the market, you either need to change supply or change demand. And you can fix either end of the equation. So they figured it out. We'll get rid of demand, not increase supply. We'll just get rid of demand, and that'll fix the problem. So you're the problem. You're going to eat bugs because you demand too many things that they won't let you provide. So, but the Treasury is not happy with what this push against Ukraine, because it's gotten to be bad. It's gotten to be messy. And now that the ruble didn't crash, okay, understand this. This is really, really important. So because the ruble, they're all on board, okay, we're going to sink them economically. They're going to go down economically. And then they don't. And the Wall Street people, they start to understand really quickly, wait a minute, well, the ruble's strengthening, and we see, we don't want to lose the dollar as the world reserve currency, because that is like the end game of everything. And these fucking PR idiots don't get it. They don't get that if we lose consensus for the dollar as the world reserve currency, it's all over. So they've started to, in my perspective, move against the World Economic Forum Davos people. And that's why Jamie Dimon, for instance, did not attend Davos this year, and has basically said people should be prepared for some really bad stuff to happen. Now, the question is, are they turning against the World Economic Forum, Davos, PR people because they are genuinely in a different faction, or because they don't know any other way to try to save the whole thing? Because here's a situation. Normally you have these different factions, and then you have the president, and the president gets to decide between the factions on specific, okay, in this case we're going to go with Treasury, listens to all their arguments, and he goes with it, right? He goes with what he wants to go with. Trump's main job was blocking most of the stuff, blocking as much as he could, at least, from the neocons, etc. But we don't have a president that even has a mind right now. And so it's leaderless. And so what you see is you see these three factions using their assets in media organizations, etc., to basically trash each other and try to force the other one's hand. So you have, um, the military group mostly just being kind of quiet and like, no, we don't support that. No, we don't support that because they don't really know what to do. You're not supposed to come out publicly in the military. It's more difficult. But you have mostly the war is between the two other sides, the PR, State Department, CIA people, and the Treasury. And you're seeing them take various actions against each other to try to move things in the direction that they want to. So it's real clusterfuck, real clusterfuck. Is it exactly the picture? I don't know, because it's tough to know the exact picture. But I think what we can see is it's all coming off the rails, guys. It's all coming off the rails. And so we have all that going on, and then we have the domestic stuff. And in the domestic politics situation, I know that the Supreme Court has been handing down a lot of, wins recently, right? And look, I'm not going to take away from that. I'm not going to take away from it. I think that they're positive developments, but I'd also just throw out there that even though I support the overturn of Roe versus Wade, I'm not necessarily like a ban abortion kind of guy. I don't. I'm just. We've kind of talked about this before. I don't. What's been going on is so disgusting and out of control. I'm happy to see kind of hit against them, and more than anything else, I'm happy to see it go back to the states. It's the right move. It's not. There's no constitutional right to an abortion. And I think in practice, what we're going to see is most states are going to go back down to, reasonable kind of first trimester only stuff, and everything beyond that's going to be banned, which is 100% right in my perspective. And Magenta's takes on this were really interesting because she brought a lot of good nuance to it about how life begins at conception, but the soul doesn't anchor fully until after the first trimester. It's maybe more in and out of the body. So it's, but anyway, all that shit aside, doesn't really matter. The point is that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really change much on the abortion topic because the states that were doing the really heinous things are still allowed to do those heinous things because it's just been kicked down to the states. So that hasn't even been changed yet. So you have all this stuff going on, and now you have new, communist member of the bench, Ketanji Jackson. And what I think I'm just throwing this out there because we only really trusted, there's only 3 justices that we ever really trusted, right? Gorsuch, Alito, and Thomas. And the other 3 conservative justices all seem compromised in a certain way. And so it begs the question of why they would be doing these things so aggressively right now. And I almost feel like it's another move to try to rile up the base. Try to get the Democrats to come back home, to try to allow some, create more division in the country when the country is starting to come together. I just have to say that I see that. Like, when I look at these Supreme Court decisions, I'm not upset. But from the cabal's perspective, they seem to me like tactical retreats. That, okay, we'll give up Roe versus Wade. It's not going to really change much anyway. But we can use our powers of perception manipulation to make people think that Republicans are going to get rid of abortions. And that's going to make a lot of these liberals who really hate us say, well, I'm still going to turn out for you because of this topic. Or the same thing with guns, right? So I have to say that I'm seeing that play out. I'm seeing a lot of tactical retreats on the front with the cabal because they don't mind doing tactical retreats. They just need to control the narrative. That's the big thing. And that's why Putin's so frustrating for them, just to go back to that, because Putin isn't letting them control the narrative because it's a physical confrontation. And so that whole PR, focus just isn't working in the war anymore because, well, if it was working, how do you explain the gains on the ground for Russia? So anyway, guys, I think that's kind of where we're at right now. It's a lot of changes. The only last thing I'll say is I don't know about you guys, but I'm seeing a lot more of the vax side effects really hitting people, especially the boosted, really getting hit with some bad stuff. A lot of sicknesses, a lot of bizarre illnesses. So I do think that we're seeing that wave start to rise, and it's summertime. It's peak summer right now, peak sunlight. Really wonder what's going to happen this winter. My only kind of economic, not financial advice, obviously, statements I'd say is get yourself some food. Get yourself some food to stockpile just so you don't have any stress on it. So I don't think that we're going to see cryptos come back till year's end, maybe a little bit, maybe later even. And it's going to be interesting to see how many more rate hikes we have before the economy breaks. I mean, crypto got hit the hardest at first because it had the most Ponzi's and scams in it, and they were the easiest to unravel. But there's tons of that stuff going on in the market. And I think today, Amazon tech stocks really got hammered today. So we're going to see the stock market start to really drop down too. And I think housing is going to be last. So maybe this fall. So plenty of blood left. Yeah, so the Q posting again thing, most of what I've seen is just, it's a scam. It's mostly what I've seen. I haven't really taken it seriously. The McAfee channel said it was a scam. Of course, people would say the McAfee channel is a scam. But I don't know. I mean, you have to use your own discernment with it. To be honest, I saw, and I can't even remember what the details were, but I saw someone was able to identify the IP address and tag it to some kind of grifter person in the Q community, in the kind of broader truther community, which is filled with grifters and fucking retards. And that was enough for me because it didn't feel correct. It felt like a way to try to, it felt like a psyop, just felt like a psyop. So yeah, crypto's going down. I mean, here's the big thing though. Are they going to, the Federal Reserve and everything, they're gangsters. Are they going to really allow people to, get rich off of crypto? I mean, I do think stuff like Bitcoin is going to have a role in a dissident sense. It just depends on what the control mechanisms are going to be. They're definitely planning on ways to either, rebirth the dollar. So we'll see how they do it. Anyway, guys, it's good COVID Cabal. It's good talking to you. Good seeing you. And we'll reconvene in a few weeks. Have a good night.